Hey everyone, and welcome to Generative Now. I am Michael Mignano. I am a partner at Lightspeed, and for today's episode, we are talking to someone we had on the show back around 3 months ago, Semil Shah. He is the founder and a partner at Haystack VC, and also a venture partner at Lightspeed. The episode that I did with him a few months ago actually turned out to be one of our most popular episodes ever, and so we thought, what if we talk like roughly once a quarter about everything that has happened in AI in the preceding 3 months? And so that's what we did today. And you know what? If you all like this episode, maybe we'll do it again in another 3 months from now. So check out this episode with Semil Shah and let us know what you think. Hello, sir.
Mike, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. Just have a little bit of a different, you kind of blew up my schedule today, so I had to kind of plan around you, you know.
Yeah. I did the same for you, just to be clear. I moved my schedule around for you also. That's how special you are.
Yeah. It's also baseball. I know you played baseball growing up, so it's a big baseball time in our household where both my boys are playing, but one of them, he's just sinking his teeth into it. So
oh, really?
we have to go get a bag today and get a bat and get a new helmet and, you know, big decisions.
I think our kids are around, I think your sons and my daughters are sort of around the same age, but my kids don't play baseball, so I don't know. Is he old enough such that like he has a position and stuff, or is it just Little League? It's just like you just go everywhere. They're
going from second to third grade. If you play competitive now, which I don't know if he'll do now, but they definitely slot you. They definitely evaluate you based on like position. But he's also lefty. So once it gets competitive, they can strain you to like outfield, pitcher, first base. That's it.
Got it. Oh man, so much pressure.
It gets serious quick. You know, there's no third grade left-handed third baseman.
You played ball, right?
Yeah. I played a lot of baseball. I mean, that was my life growing up.
I guess at some point you probably imagined not being a VC, a famous VC and tech personality, but a famous baseball player.
Well, I never thought I would play like super competitive baseball, but I just really loved it. And I was only a catcher and pitcher, so I was always involved in the game.
Yeah.
And it makes a pretty big impact.
Yeah. Like strategically.
I mean, obviously with pitcher or catcher, you're in the game every play that you're in the game.
Totally.
And with the catcher, you're the only one to see all the field, so you're directing a lot of traffic and calling signs. And
yeah,
this is the only thing I really knew. You know, occasionally I played first base, but like honestly, I didn't have the hands. I didn't have like the hands and footwork for that.
Yeah, I played. I come from a baseball family, but I wasn't that good, and so I always got stuck in like the positions where they stuck like the not so great players. I think I played like a lot of right field. I did a little infield actually, a little shortstop, a little third base, but also some right field. You know, I feel like that's where you get stuck.
I had a good arm, so I was always like pitching like at the end of the rotation because I was like the fourth or fifth best arm, but it wasn't like the best position for me. But yeah, the catching really impacts a lot. You learn so many things by doing that. It's almost like it's hard to strip those away over time.
So moving away from baseball, we last did this almost exactly 3 months ago.
Yes. It felt like 6 months ago.
Do you know that your episode, I believe, is my second most popular episode of all time?
Well, thank you.
What do you make of that?
I don't really read into episode popularity. So I don't read anything into it. I think that I do think, you know, it's easy to kind of crap on VCs and they're a fun punching bag. But the reality is, like, there are some really good ones. Hopefully you and I will be good ones. And they do see a lot at a high level and can put points together. And I do think those insights are valuable to the ecosystem. So maybe that's why you let a VC into the hen house.
Yeah. One of the things that has happened, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, that I thought was really interesting was this essay from Chris Paik about the end of software. Did you read this?
Yeah.
The point he makes is that in a previous era of computing, the internet and smartphones basically made it such that there was a democratization of media creation. And as a result, now anyone can create media, whether it's photos or videos, etc. And now AI will do the same thing for software. And AI will democratize software. Anyone will be able to make any products. And the thing that we haven't seen yet is like, where and how does the distribution happen, right? The platforms that figured out how to distribute media at scale, those ended up being the ultimate winners, right? YouTube, Instagram, etc. Who's going to do that for software when software is democratized via AI? I thought that was kind of interesting.
It is interesting. I mean, I think it's just fun to talk about. And obviously, Chris is super smart. Despite Chris being a super smart guy, I personally don't put a lot of stock in that for two reasons. One is the same people that distribute all the media, whether it's Salesforce and the enterprise side or all the way to Facebook, Google.
Did you mean software? Sorry.
Yes.
You said media.
Software is like a version of media.
Okay, got it.
That's how I think about it. But the other thing is that like before we even uttered the phrase generative AI or generative models before that, people were talking about and building low code, no code things and connectors and all that stuff. And, I used to work at this company, if this, then that, building connectors, and people can stitch together these things in very crude ways. So I just wonder how much of this is all the same thing and was possible before. I also think it underestimates the amount of craftsmanship that goes into like both the front end and back end of designing really intuitive software. Like I know you were working with Chris and the Granola folks. Like, could AI have really come in with those opinionated insights in the beginning? Like, I don't know.
Not today. But it seems conceivable that it could in the future with enough data.
Yeah, I don't mean to sound bearish on it. I just still think this idea of a human in the loop or developer in the loop will not go away and not be marginalized.
What do you think, though, of like the demand to learn how to program? What will happen there? I mean, I majored in computer science. I wanted to learn how to program. I wanted to be a programmer. The biggest thing that Chris's essay got me thinking is like, well, when my kids get ready to go away to college, like, are they going to want to major in computer science, or will nobody be doing that?
I think it's an interesting question, and maybe even more philosophical, because you could say like, hey, do I want to go learn a skill or vocation and be able to learn scripting languages like Python and Java, etc. Or do I want to actually understand how computers work and how the bare metal works and how the silicon works, and being able to like understand a program maybe in C or something where you're able to interact with the whole system, right? And I still think there are people who will do that.
What's so funny and interesting about what you just said is that, so at least part of my CS degree, and I'm sure the same is true at other universities and programs, like you do learn about all that stuff, how computers work, all you learn about the most foundational stuff. And at the time, I remember thinking to myself, like, why do I care about this? I don't want to know any of this. I just want to know how to go build some product, some piece of software. And only recently, during this whole AI boom, have I been like, oh, that was pretty interesting stuff to learn.
Well, another way to articulate what you just said is that, like, I mentioned there's a vocational, like, how do I do the thing path, or I want to be a systems integrator, or I want to be an Oracle database architect or whatever. And you just go and you bang that out. The thing that you're talking about is how do you set up a foundation for continuous learning over time? Right. So like, not to sideswipe this into like cooking, but like, I think a lot of this is related to like, oh yeah, I was trained to like cook in a kitchen and like learn these basic techniques, right? Whether it's cutting things or flavors that go together naturally, or like, ways to thicken up things or thin things down or boil them down or expand them per se. And so now when I get a new recipe or I'm trying to think about something new, I just know all the base level techniques and I can pick up something new and put it together without any, I don't have to write anything down or recall anything about the recipe itself.
Do you know this guy? Do you know Joe Albanese?
Joe Albanese.
He's the founder of a company called Stir.
I've heard of Stir.
Yeah, I saw this thing that he's working on recently, where he's leveraging the GPT-4o APIs to do like a sous chef, which I thought of you actually. Speaking of cooking, because it's basically, you know, right now it's on the phone. You know, maybe you could have it on some other device in the future, but it's like watching what you're doing. And you can not only ask it questions like you would a sous chef, but it might like actively be able to see something and make a suggestion or a recommendation. Oh, you want to know how to thicken this up? Just, you know, go over to your counter over there or your cabinet over there and get some flour or whatever. I thought it was kind of interesting.
It is. I think for me, it might be, I mean, I appreciate Joel's.
You're really good.
There.
Like you're like an expert chef.
No. For me, it's more like that's like one of the few things I do where technology isn't really involved. So I'm like hesitant to bring it in. But going back to the CS thing, like I do think people will go pursue a computer science degree for the intellectual pursuit of a Bachelor of Arts or a Bachelor of Science in a field because they're interested in how these things work. But I think the larger question you're asking is, will our kids want to go be an Oracle database architect or a Salesforce integration consultant? And I do think there are a lot of things where, I kind of buy into the Nabil argument of like a lot of these things will free up developers to do more creative, higher level abstractions and tasks, and the lower level stuff will get metered out. So maybe Chris is right to a degree, and maybe it's also not fully correct in another sense.
Yeah. What's interesting about what you just said is making me think like, okay, in the world where he's correct, or at least directionally sort of accurate, does CS almost become, I think to your point around being a database engineer versus not, does it become like almost like a type of history degree?
Well, I mean, I'm sure you've met Chris Dixon in the past. I was lucky to meet him right between his first and second startup, and he was like one of the most prolific angels in the late 2000s in New York. And, if you read all his stuff or look back and everyone thinks, oh, he's super thoughtful, I mean, clearly a thoughtful guy and understands how these large platform network effect companies, what their strategies and weaknesses are, is a philosophy and computer science major, right? And so I do think you see a lot of people like that, like Charlie Cheever is like this in a way, right? Or you talk to Adam D'Angelo, he's kind of like this, right? And a lot of the people who are building the most exciting models today have that pedigree, right?
There's a much bigger element of philosophy in technology happening right now than I can remember out of my entire career, I would say.
Yeah. And it's way beyond my pay grade. I mean, I kind of like you, I know the players and I've interacted with some over the years, and you could see the pattern in the pedigree. You're not going to hatch this in your dorm room. There has to be some intellectual underpinnings to building in this world. The exciting thing though is on top, what people will build on top. I do think Chris is right. It's more democratized in a way. And so, you hear all the arguments on Twitter. It could take fewer companies, right? Like I think Instagram was like 11 to 15 people when it was acquired. I think WhatsApp was about 50, right? So, those were happening pre-generative AI, right? So you have to assume it can happen now because conditions haven't really changed. And, could that increase in velocity where we had maybe, let's say if we're being generous, maybe 5 of these, Minecraft, right? Twitch, I don't think had tons of people. Could you increase the velocity of those over time?
Yeah.
I always think too, when someone writes a post like this, even if it's someone as smart as Chris, they're probably 49 to 50% right and 49 to 51%, maybe overestimating the impact.
Yeah, I think that's probably right. You said something interesting earlier when we were talking about the sous chef. You said cooking for you is a place where technology does not go. And I thought that was interesting because it does seem like with AI, technology will go in more places that it previously did not go, right? Especially if you think about agents and like transcription. I mean, even like granola, you talked about granola a little while ago. People love this product. And yeah, I'm full disclosure, I am an investor.
We unfortunately passed, but we love Chris. And so good on you.
Yeah, I had the good fortune of getting close to Chris when he was building his last company and just seeing, how amazing he was.
Actually, I was catching up with Ashay, my partner, yesterday, and we were talking about it. And I remember distinctly liking Chris. And distinctly, we had this conversation. I was like, I've seen 100 pitches of people trying to like summarize and getting to the meeting notes flow. And we both started laughing. Chris and I started laughing. And he was like, yeah. And I was like, I don't know. And he's like, yeah, it's crazy. So we made the wrong decision.
We'll see. It's still early. I feel very, very lucky. But, with that product as an example, that feels like a place that technology normally wouldn't go. And now it's going there, right? I'm trying to think where else technology will go as a result of AI. I mean, obviously, like Humane imagined a world where you're filming everything at all times, right?
Well, remember, this was the spectacles, Snap spectacles, which I really like that product idea of like, just being able to have the light on the phone mention if the camera's on or off. And I don't mind that. I think having wearable, this is just my 2 cents. I mean, I'm one person, but a world in which visible wearable technology that has clear sensor indicators on, I do think will happen.
People love those Meta Ray-Ban glasses. People love those things. I haven't tried them yet. Have you tried them?
And of course, Apple's working on that too. So they're not dummies, and there's so many applications of it. So I think it's just a matter of when, not if. So, that will come in and create issues for people, and people will have to figure out the right way to do it. It's all TBD.
Even AirPods, by the way, like I have my AirPods in all the time. 4 years ago, I didn't even own them or whatever it was.
No, I mean those little things that absolutely make a difference. I mean, how many people fall asleep with like earpods in their ears?
Right.
So I mean, that's just kind of nuts and potentially not a good thing.
Yeah, that's true.
The other thing, I mean, aside from like the obvious stuff, a lot of VCs will say like, hey, it'll seep into other parts of the economy that were slower to transition, over. And I've heard that for a decade. And the reality is like, it's true.
Like what?
Into like aerospace and defense or like industrial manufacturing or, fill in the blank. It doesn't even matter what you fill in the blank with.
Education.
Classroom. Whatever. I mean, the classroom is another place where as a parent and a contrarian opinion, I am extremely concerned about these sort of devices in classroom and doing assignments on them after. I think if I were to vote right now, I'm a kind of hard no on it. Like right now I'm like pencil, pen, scratch pad, write it out again, write it out again. Don't flip between tabs,
I think there are probably lots of places where technology doesn't go today. It will increasingly go, probably at a greater rate as the result of AI.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Maybe not cooking though.
I don't mean to say that it shouldn't go in there. For me personally, when I'm doing, like I was cooking last night outside, I don't want it there. Like it's a, like some investors will go kite surfing or they'll go mountain climbing to like remove themselves and like not be thinking or having AirPods in all the time. For me, that's like cooking where, okay, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, whatever, an hour or two, I'm kind of focused on arranging something else analog.
Yeah. I think it's important to have those protected spaces. I've been trying to go no phone until I sit down at my desk for work.
Yeah.
So wake up, don't look at it, don't engage with it, work out, get ready for the day, take my kids to school, sit down at the desk. Okay.
It's a great discipline.
It's hard. I can't do it every day. I'm trying.
I think I mentioned to you, I recently went on a meditation, like very short, like not a silent meditation retreat, but I went on like this group meditation.
That's cool. I didn't know about that.
Yeah. And I wasn't really allowed to use my phone to communicate it was about a 48-hour period. I was able to like check text for like family stuff, nuclear family stuff, and then play a lot of the meditation and guide work, and like the time in between was like listening to music. So I was able to use Spotify, but yeah, it was very difficult. Like I don't think I've ever done that before,
How did you avoid the other apps? Was it all just like honor system or?
It was honor system, like other people there too. And like, it's obviously it was policing you, but yeah, it was easy not to check email. It was a Friday and Saturday into Sunday. And it was easy not to check Twitter.
Yeah.
Or Instagram. Like I'm not hooked to that. But the hardest part was like iMessage.
Yep. Yeah. Same for me.
That was like, so if you were to say again, like, hey, Semil, would you do that again? Could you go through it? Well, of course I have to have Spotify. Like that's it. Like I'm absolutely not getting rid of that. And iMessage, that was tough because so much, like people were like, are you okay? Like, it's like, it is a little disturbing that people are that conditioned to hearing back.
Yeah, where I've struggled a little bit when I am doing one of these things where I don't have access to my phone, I also notice that the times when I struggle the most are when I feel like I have to get in touch with somebody, like I'm running a little bit late for something and I feel bad and I want to let the person know, hey, I'm late, or yeah, like I don't even know what time it is. That actually, like, I'm surprised how much that has affected me when I do these things. Like, I don't know what time it is. I have to go be somewhere or pick up my kid or.
But I think what I'm getting at slightly different, which is imagine this weekend you were to say with your wife and family, like, hey, I'm just going to have my watch and I'm not going to use my phone. And like, yeah, I'll monitor work email in my office when I need to at home and whatever. You can probably do all that. But if you're not doing iMessage, that I think is really hard.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I haven't fully sat with that to understand why is it.
Because everyone, we are conditioned to be immediately accessible to everyone at all times, and vice versa. Like we have gone from a world in which we are disconnected to being always connected. I mean, if you text somebody and you don't hear back in an hour, you're like, huh, that's weird.
Yeah. So anyway, that was like the big realization I had from that was like, wow, that the stickiness of that is much deeper than email or a social network.
Yeah. So the other big thing, well, one of the very big things, I think maybe the biggest that has happened since you and I last saw each other was very recent. That was WWDC.
Oh, yeah.
Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference. I think, the impact that let's say potentially has on AI, VC, tech feels pretty big. Do you agree? Did you feel like that was a big moment?
I think all these things, like, I mean, we can kind of joke about it and poke fun at all these big folks. But the reality is they're the straw stirring the drink.
Yes.
And they have a lot of the things that are needed. They have the eyeballs, they have the financial cache resources. They have the infinite time horizon. They have international political power and branding. They have direct relationships with their customers. They have the sophistication to protect, in some cases, people's data, or create more personalized things, or control the point of delivery. And I could go on, but I do think these things matter a great deal. And then I kind of reflecting back on our previous conversation of why I try to not be too thesis specific in this world, because I know we're doing this. We're going to try this out quarterly now. Like, how much is going to change every 3 months? Like, it just feels like it's just going to be this constant treadmill of changes.
Yeah. Do you are you one that watches these? Do you watch every WWDC, every major Apple event?
Yeah, I'll watch. I mean, I won't watch the whole thing, but I'll watch a video. I mean, I love the opening, and like I think Apple puts on a great thing. I even like the Google one with that crazy musician guy.
Oh yeah, what was that guy's name?
I don't know, but I loved it.
I think he's like a known guy. Like he was like yelling and stuff. At first, I was like, did they just find this guy off the street? But I think he's like a real musician.
He's a professional.
He's a pro.
Yeah, you just don't go up there on stage and do that.
Or maybe you do. I don't know.
I don't know. Yeah. So yeah, I do watch them, and I think on the Apple one, like, one I loved, it's so simple and subtle, but I love that they call it Apple Intelligence, or short for AI.
Oh yeah. Classic Apple.
I like that they're not panicking to like push something out the door first or do all this stuff. And I just think of it as like, when we raise money from these institutions where they have like an infinite time horizon of like permanent capital, it's like, what if we took a 2030 year view on how we want to deliver this kind of technology to Mike and his family and me and my family. You might make different decisions, so I think that's really interesting.
That's typical for them, right? They tend to do that. They sort of wait to watch the market develop a little bit.
Yeah. And like, we never see like the sausage being made, right? So imagine the debates and iterative stuff happening internally. So I think all that's super exciting. And of course, like, it is one of the main repositories where, the creative class is dumping a lot of data into. So we're perpetually in the first inning of all this stuff, and we have a long game ahead of us.
For sure. What did you make of the ChatGPT thing?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, sometimes I think about this stuff from like in international relations, or like risk, meaning that board game Risk, point of view, where it's like, yeah, if you're OpenAI, you don't want to be perceived or beholden to one mega platform. So that makes sense that you would spread your tentacles out. From the Apple point of view, I feel like it's like, hey, let's partner and try to make friends with an industry leader. We're not going to give away our store, and we may be able to help them out a little bit, and they may be able to help us out a little bit. And, let's start dating. That's how I view it.
They did signal that there will be more models that can integrate at that point. It almost feels like it's one of those things like a browser search where you'll have a default, is it Google or is it, I don't know. I feel like or Bing had one of the default slots. Maybe they still do.
Well, one of my favorite lines from the recent pod with Lex Friedman is like, maybe the AI just gives you a browser when you need it.
For sure. I did find it interesting. I went back and listened a few times just to make sure this was right. They never mention OpenAI. They only mention ChatGPT.
Ah, interesting. Yeah. Who knows? I mean, like, this is like you're dealing with like DOD levels of classification, right? Of like people watching every single word that comes out. It's beyond me, but yeah, that is interesting. I didn't pick up on that.
Yeah, I was wondering, like, I mean, there are a number, who knows why this is the case, but like, on one hand, maybe it's because ChatGPT is kind of the consumer brand. Maybe they feel like that's the thing people would know most. Maybe the more cynical take could be that past couple of weeks, OpenAI has been in the media a lot for some controversial topics. Maybe they wanted to distance themselves from that.
Well, I think if you ask like in your kid's school district, 1,000 parents, do you know ChatGPT? Probably 70 to 80% would mark yes, I know what that is. Then if you ask the follow-up question, who creates ChatGPT? I would say less than 5% would know.
Yeah, it's probably a lot lower. So it's probably just a brand thing, like a brand awareness thing. I do think, you mentioned risk earlier. I do think risk plays a role here, right?
You mean the board game?
The board game, yeah. No, the risk of, well, there are risk on a number of different dimensions. So first of all, I think a model on an iOS device is like a clear, obvious win for Apple. I think a model that reaches out into the world beyond the Apple device, you can see some very obvious risk vectors, right? Number one, perhaps being that it's really, really expensive to train these things, and it seems like it's only getting more expensive. And by the way, the business model of these things is still very uncertain. Although yesterday the figure came out that said ChatGPT is now doing 3.4 billion annually, which is nuts. But increasing costs and unclear return on investment, I would say, is one risk factor.
Yeah, maybe I'm not understanding. Like when you say there's a risk there, do you mean a risk for Apple?
Yeah, for a risk for. So I think there's a benefit to Apple potentially. Maybe, by the way, maybe this is not how they came to this decision. I think there's a benefit to Apple having somebody else do this for now.
Oh, right. 100%. Like, again,
yeah.
we're dating.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'm saying rather than do it themselves, because you have to assume they could do this themselves if they wanted to, right?
Well, no, I mean, let's be clear. Like so? Everyone loves Apple. I met the Siri founders here when I first moved to the Valley. We were at the same cocktail party, and they had just been acquired. I was literally at that stage of my career. I was just trying to get invited to like events and parties. You know what I mean? And I happened to meet them, and just even hearing them talk about, this is like over 10 years ago, right? How they were bought and integrated into this thing. I mean, Larry David, like the Siri skit, I mean, is like, that says it all. Like,
so you don't think they could have a ChatGPT like, or a GPT-4 like model?
No.
Interesting. Okay. I hadn't considered that.
Not today.
I assumed this was like an active choice.
Sorry. I believe, like, I'm not like Mark Gurman or MG or any of these guys I idolize.
I don't know
like,
shit.
I don't know, like Gruber, MG, all these guys are like gods. Yeah. Like they know way more than me. And I actually really like Tim Cook. Like he actually lived in my neighborhood in Palo Alto, so I'd see him around. And he strikes me as like a super nice guy. So it's nothing personal, but I don't think Apple will ever be able to do something like that until the leadership changes.
Say more.
I just think there's nothing wrong with him. I think he's great. You know, I just think like Siri is a product that got worse over time.
Yep.
Which is really hard to do.
Yeah, I wonder if it got worse or like the requirements and the expectations of the consumers got higher.
No,
and it just never.
No. It sucks.
Yeah, it has always sucked. It has always sucked.
But it gets worse over time. Like just the basic stuff. So like just based on that, I would not bet on Apple being able to do it themselves. And they have I think the decision to do it this way to start is wise.
Yeah. Do you think it gets, so let's take the ChatGPT, and just to be clear what we're talking about sort of new Siri, where if I'm understanding the presentation correctly, new Siri is like within the container of the iPhone. And then if you want to go out to the open internet, that's when ChatGPT comes in, right? So based on the presentation, do you think new Siri is going to be a meaningful step up from current shitty Siri?
I want to say I hope so.
Yeah, it seemed like it from the presentation.
I hope. I guess what I would say, my politically correct but true, like truthful answer is, I hope that to be so. But like this is an area in which, it's just a kryptonite area for them.
Yeah.
It's just straight up kryptonite.
I do think all right, for maybe setting aside whether or not they could pull off something like GPT, I do think, let's assume they could for a second. I do think by them partnering with ChatGPT now, it does enable them to avoid some landmines. And I'll just name a few. One is what we just mentioned, the rising cost of these things and the still very much TBD business models. Number two is, I think there's still a lot of controversy about these things, right? OpenAI is getting sued left and right.
Right.
I think they're being sued by publishers around training data. That is a big question mark.
This is a great point. Like, why touch that right now?
Why touch it? Why touch it? And by the way, if for some reason OpenAI goes away or has like some catastrophic situation, just plug in Gemini or plug in whoever.
That's the way we're going, right? Whether you're a developer, you're your Mignano household, your Apple, you're not going to be beholden to one thing.
Yeah.
But I agree. Like the thing you're riffing on, totally agree.
It's interesting though, like they're walking such a fine line because Apple always wants to do the really safe, privacy-oriented thing.
Well, this is the whole upgrade cycle for devices too, right? Like everyone in our industry is absolutely going to upgrade within the next year.
Definitely. This is the thing.
Now, but it does raise the stakes too, right? Because you're paying premium dollar for the device. You're paying, whatever Apple One Plus or whatever they call it, membership for whatever integrated services. And, like, let's see, we could be a year from now and Larry David does another skit about his Siri iPhone and it's even worse. Like, it's possible.
Yeah.
Like, it's a coin flip to me. It's a coin flip.
Let's say it works. You flip the coin, lands on heads, it works. And it changes mobile computing moving forward. So much so that maybe the paradigm around hardware changes. To bring back Tim Cook to the conversation, who we were just talking about, like, do you think he can pull off that transition?
Let me answer those in reverse, because the first one is, can Tim Cook pull off that transition? My humble view, no. Again, okay. I like Tim Cook. I think he's been great. I think, like Goldman Sachs changes their leadership every 10 years. Like, it's not a criticism of the previous leader. It's just things change. In terms of like the coin flip working out and changing the paradigm, I don't know. Like, I'm not a future of computing savant. This is like one of the reasons, people love to rag on VCs of like, da-da-da-da-da is the next platform shift.
Yeah.
It's like, okay. So like, what are those? Like, the one I've heard for 10 years is voice. Well, Jeff Bezos got 100 million echoes and hockey pucks connected all the time, wired up in people's households. There were connectors set up to like order an Uber or put something to a grocery list. And like, I would just say like, just stripping away all the possibilities from that. It's just easier for my wife and I to write in the grocery list strawberries. And I think a lot of it does come down to that, where I do think we have gotten, what's the word? Spoiled in that like text input in an app is pretty good.
But it doesn't mean it won't ever change.
It doesn't mean it won't ever change. I think that's why Apple has a watch, right? Of like, think of how many people are going through Central Park and being like, yeah, not even that I want to, philosophically leave my phone at my desk and take a run in the middle of the workday, but actually I don't want to run with my phone.
Yeah. So, okay. I agree with all this. I guess then the question is, if there were to be a new, completely groundbreaking, innovative hardware platform shift, could Tim Cook pull off that transition? Could Tim Cook's Apple invent the next iPhone?
I don't think Tim Cook's Apple will figure out how to integrate these cutting edge AI technologies in a way that just works for us right away. That being said, I do think he gets credit for overseeing the process of the AirPods coming out, which again is not revolutionary. It's more of an evolution, right? And the Vision Pro, which I would argue, I actually just saw a friend of mine, like did a jungle expedition, like in a real jungle.
Whoa.
Yeah. In like a real jungle, like tropical kind of jungle, and took a lot of video through spatial video. And I saw some of it in the Pro and I was like kind of blown away. So he should get credit for those two things. So could there be a new thing that emerges from there? I would give Tim Cook more credit as an orchestrator of people, based on those two things.
I mean, to his credit, I mean, he took over in 2011. Think about the value creation out of that company since then.
Oh, again, I was only on like the ability to take Siri into a place where it's not a punching bag. I don't think he can do that, but I think he does get credit for a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. It does feel like we're entering a new era. And I even think that there are other products and companies that could stand to benefit massively from this shift. I mean, you mentioned Amazon and the Alexas. I mean, you are right. It is not that convenient to do a grocery list on my Alexa. It's not that convenient to order an Uber. It's not that convenient to, honestly, like, it doesn't even always work with Spotify. But I imagine it will be 10 times better if it's powered by an LLM.
No doubt. But that's different than the interface or the interface, right?
I don't know.
What's serving the content? Yes. What the interface? I mean, I don't really know. Like, again, do I think something's possible? Absolutely. I'm not saying it's impossible, but when people say fill in the blank can be the next computing platform, I'm generally pretty skeptical.
Yeah. Okay. I agree with you. I think both things are kind of true. Like, I don't know that voice will be the next platform shift. I do feel like voice interfaces can start to steal away a meaningful chunk of time that we currently spend on screens. I don't think they'll replace them. I don't even think it'll be 30%. It might be 5%. It might be 10.
In some cases, it's faster to type and tap than speak. And most people don't speak in true natural language. They actually meander and it's all over the place.
That's the beauty of the LLM, though. You don't need to speak perfectly with them. So actually, yesterday I did something that a lot of people have done. You see this on Twitter all the time, but I haven't done it until yesterday. I wired up ChatGPT voice with the action button. You've seen people do this?
Yeah.
It's pretty cool. It runs in the background. I can have my AirPods in. I can just tap and hold the button, start a conversation. And it was kind of nice. It was almost like I was instantly connected to a customer service rep for my life.
What did you use the action button for?
So next week I'm flying to Europe and I have a very tight layover in a certain airport, going to another airport. And I was talking to my wife about this and she's like, well, why don't you call the airline? And I'm thinking, man, it's gonna, like, I'm not going to get someone. It's going to take forever to get through. I'm like, let me just see what ChatGPT has to say about this. And I tried it. It was a pretty cool experience. I kind of liked it. It wasn't perfect. There were some delays in there, which I think are going to get much faster with 4.0 new voice mode. But it felt pretty cool. And I was walking. I was on the go. So I didn't have to type. I didn't have to look down and type. You know, it was just like I was on the go, just having a conversation.
Yeah. I think it's possible. I mean, I think if I were to bet whatever the new little platform is, I think it will be an extension of the hardware we already use.
Yeah, I think I agree with that.
And I do think Apple will try to control that.
100%. Did you see how the Apple stock price was down during the presentation? And then the next day, right after Ben Thompson published his take, it like exploded. You think that was all him? You think it was Ben Thompson?
I mean, of course, there's always a Ben Thompson effect, but I just like I don't pay like I just have given up trying to figure out like why stocks move up and down. I think
of course,
people are crazy.
Of course,
but yeah, Ben is a god. Ben is a living god amongst us.
He is a living god. Do you read him daily?
Yeah, I mean, I've known Ben a long time. I mean, he and I kind of know each other because we were both like writing about stuff, and
yep.
You know, then he really blew up. I mean, it's just I've never met anyone in our industry who can do what he does. True N of one.
Yeah, the volume of stuff he puts out is crazy. Like the volume is high and the quality is just insane.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ben is truly unique. I mean, I've thought about this in reading some of his stuff. I mean, obviously I don't read everything every day, but when I do, I think of it as like, you know, in order for someone to write this post, it requires a knowledge of like internet architecture, right? And how the internet is set up and works on a protocol level.
Yep.
Then it's like the knowledge of like application creation and delivery, a legal understanding of like patent and technology law, and like the international kind of quote international relations between these companies and how they compete and cooperate.
Yep.
That's crazy. And this isn't to demote anybody else, but like all the people who comment on what NVIDIA can be doing or what Apple is doing or Google is doing, Ben is really the only person who you can attribute a stock price movement to.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, I think you and I might read his NVIDIA stuff and all the top hedge fund CIOs read it too.
Yeah.
You know, so it's really powerful.
I've really been enjoying his interview series with Nat Friedman and Daniel Gross every couple of, I don't know how often they do it, but like, I feel like I get smarter from those on all, I don't know. It's just a very good zoomed out view.
Yeah. I mean, he's smart too. I mean, he doesn't do that with many people, right?
No. He won't have VCs on.
No.
What about Google? Like, what's your take on Google in all of this? Obviously, a lot of people they've taken a lot of shit, but they're Google.
Someone recently pointed out, which I think is like common knowledge, although maybe forgotten, is like, I think Larry and Sergey, when they were PhD students, were in the AI lab.
Yeah, I think that's right.
So this is in their blood, so to speak, right?
I think Sergey's like committing code. Sergey's like in the trenches right now, they say.
Yeah, I don't think this is like a earth-shattering statement. It's like just the largesse and the sort of plaque buildup organizationally makes it really hard to get going, you know? So do they have the capabilities, the financial resources, the cutting edge, just even like just being around TensorFlow, being around that ecosystem, right? Like they're in an amazing position. And, you know, I wouldn't count them out by any means.
Yeah.
So I think they're in a different position than Apple, and probably a good wake up call. And, you know, I'm not like a management consultant type. Like, I don't know what the right thing to do is, but like, I know they try to break up Google into like Alphabet to like make sure that all the project sprawl that was there, my understanding is that there's some accounting for it. And like the CFO, when they go report, you know, quarterly, can kind of give shareholders a clearer view of what's happening. I wonder if that needs to happen on an even grander and more intentional scale to release some of these product creators out. Because even if you think about some of the new stuff coming out now, a lot of those people have Google pedigree. And, that seems like kind of a shame, right? Like if I'm Larry and Sergey, I just think a lot of researchers at OpenAI, obviously the Anthropic folks, the original, Transformers paper, et cetera. I mean, this is all common lore now, but it seems like kind of a shame that the competing interests inside the organization, there's so many competing interests in so many people that it's not producing the very best of what they're capable of.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess per your point, now a lot of these people have left. They've gone on to start very prominent companies. Maybe we will continue to see that.
It's possible.
I do think, like, we talked a little while ago about Apple and how they are leveraging ChatGPT, perhaps because, as you pointed out, maybe they can't pull off a GPT-4. Perhaps because some of the risks you and I talked about. Google does have that whole stack, right? They have the OS for half of the market share of smartphones in the world. And they do have Gemini, right? And they have the dominant search platform. So obviously, like maximum distribution. I don't know. I think that could be interesting. That could be very, very, very a very, very formidable competitor to everything Apple's lining up right now. But of course, people were not nearly as excited about Google's conference a few weeks ago as people were about WWDC just a couple of days ago.
Yeah, but people don't have the same like hardware and emotional connection to Apple as they do to Google. Yeah, so I think that's the proof will be in the pudding. Like, what drives revenue? What drives the incredible business model? Right.
What have you observed about VC or in the VC landscape in the past couple of months since?
Well, I think that's why we're going to experiment with doing this quarterly, because I think that is bonkers. Like, anything
tell
we
me
discussed,
your observations.
I think a lot of VCs have conflated that this is going to be the next thing with, let me just invest in it at all costs. I think as VC firms have gotten bigger, they do need to move more money, and this is a perfect vessel to move a lot of money in right now. I do think that entrepreneurs are picking up on this, some in genuine ways and some in, I think, potentially harmful to the ecosystem ways. Like I was joking with a friend yesterday who mentioned that they were talking to a potential founder who's thinking about starting something, and the founder casually mused to them whether it was easier to raise money for an AI startup or to actually get a job at an AI company. It's kind of sad. I think there's been a really fever pitch around this stuff, and people they're almost getting kind of like Braveheart about it.
What do you mean?
Or just like it's moving from like business and technology conviction into like more religious conviction, and tremendous amount of FOMO. So a lot of it makes sense to me in the sense that I do think there'll be great opportunities, but there's a huge fear of missing out right now.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of capital, so it's kind of a perfect storm.
How does that end?
It's funny, like Ken Griffin, who arguably is the most successful hedge fund manager in the world, and he gives a lot of talks. His most recent talk at Milken a couple of weeks ago, he was even more forceful in his statements than he was in the past. He's very prepared. But he basically said that like they've been using AI a lot, and a lot of their own computer scientists and developers have been integrating it into their own systems for their different working groups, But then when he goes and asks other companies they're evaluating, to invest in, or other pitches he takes, and he asks them like, well, what have you done? He said he doesn't really get a lot back. It's a lot of hand wavy stuff. for someone like Ken to say that is, I think, pretty interesting. And he also said, and I'm paraphrasing now, that a lot of people feel like the correction in the economy started, in the beginning of 2022, and the last few years had been that kind of unwinding, but tech has kind of taken off. I don't want to speak for Ken, but the way I heard his Milken talk was like more that like we're now nearing the end of the cycle, and this could be a part of the end. This sort of froth that's happening now. I thought that was an interesting framing. I haven't sat with that long enough to come up with my own view, and obviously he has better data than me going. But I do think it's a provocative thesis that actually the correction never really happened, but we're on the precipice of it, and it could be triggered by this.
This is like a sort of last gasp.
Yeah. Again, who knows? I mean, it could be totally off. But I do think it's an interesting comment and provocative, because I think most people in our world, in the technology world, would have said, no, actually the clock started again in 2022, and then ChatGPT, and then Anthropic, and then blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, that's interesting. What are you seeing? I think you may have actually put out some tweets about this, about sort of the state of seed and A, about really about A, I guess, how hard it is to raise Series A and beyond. But maybe with the lens of AI versus not AI.
Yeah, I think AI is in its own sort of space. I mean, I don't fully understand that market. I mean, I think it's very competitive. I mean, you live in there, so I'd love to learn from you. I think we think about things more broadly. So what I see is that, like, if you're a company that's not like a true AI native technology company, and you're trying to raise the next round, everyone's pretty distracted right now. So it becomes tougher. There's two ways to read that, which is, hey, those people will be left behind, and the venture market is just fixating on the place where every investment can be a 10x investment. Or you can say, hey, that's actually a good place to deploy capital, because there's a scarcity of capital and attention there. And like, if you take a 10-year view on this stuff, like, there will be good companies that don't have this as like their core ethos and like their all being right now.
Right. It's like the contrarian bet to make right now. If everyone's investing in AI, invest in things that aren't AI for the alpha.
There's also just like a price. There's like a price thing going on too, where it's like, to go in above 50 million price, like at a 50 million price, you can get $1 billion exit 20x that entry. That's a lot. Like, so I think a lot of these things are just distorting the economics there.
Right. So yeah, AI, being frothy, valuations being higher, for a seed fund like Haystack, the business model maybe breaks down on some of these deals where it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. In a funny way, like, a lot of what we've done have been AI applications that are very specific and would never be built into a core model.
Mm-hmm. But
the reason we did that wasn't because we like thought about the landscape and like narrowed in on that. It was because those rounds were actually like normal seed rounds.
Yeah.
The entrepreneur was raising like $3 million or $4 million. And I still think that's a lot of money, but we get desensitized to how much people need or how much people can raise.
Do you think this current dynamic ends up having basically like a long-term or let's say like permanent impact on VC altogether? Like, will this change the way the game is played from here on out?
The difference today is that you have multiple large platforms that have multiple billion-dollar pockets of money to invest globally.
Mm-hmm. And
so they're playing for the chance to be in the next Salesforce, or
you're referring to the LPs.
LPs and VCs. Yeah.
Okay.
They're paying for the opportunity and chance to be, a 10, 8% owner in the next Salesforce or whatever, right? And what's interesting is that like the market supports that potential hypothesis. Like if you look at the $1 trillion companies, like a couple of them were started within the last 20 years or so, right? Or one of them just really picked up that market cap in the last 5 to whatever years, right? So could that happen with one or two more companies? Like, can you get $100-200 billion company in 10 years? Like, I think it's possible, and that's a game that they're playing. So they'll all be chasing the things that work to get a spot in that, right? And then the problem becomes is you want to move earlier and earlier and earlier, right? And keep it captive in the portfolio. So I do think it'll change venture. I mean, it already has, because you'll have these like multi-billion-dollar platforms there that now can go attack global markets. And the data is already set. Like even in again, putting Ken Griffin aside in that correction, what is Datadog still a $30 billion company? Right. It's still legit. So, if OpenAI were to go public, right? Let's just assume that we're going to go public this year, would probably be a $50 to $75 billion company.
Maybe more.
At a minimum, I mean.
Yeah.
A minimum. Right? So
that's how LPs think about it. You think they think about it as in, as an asset class, it's going to be, 2x, 3x. But what I really want is I'm just hoping this vintage, maybe I end up getting a 20x because of the next OpenAI.
I actually just was texting about this with a group this morning. So if you look at, he was sharing the VC DPIs across different vintages and different size of funds. And most of them are between 1 and 2, meaning like you're locked up in this illiquid thing as an LP for 10 plus years. And in aggregate, you're going to get 1 to 2 times your money back, which sucks. I think what sophisticated LPs will say, who have a diversified book of assets, will say in traditional private equity, where I have a control investment, where something's already working, we're trying to make it work better, I can probably get a 2 to 3x net in these funds, where my underlying GPs have more control and are investing in improving more mature businesses. But if I want to get a 5x or a 10x, I need to go into venture. And that's why people pile into what they perceive to be the best funds, because if you go back to my friend's data and you just take the aggregate, it's a dumb decision. But if you're able to be in with a VC that you think is properly sized, positioned, etc., then you might be able to get a 5 or 10x, not in every vintage, but if you back them over a 2-decade period, say they have 7 or 8 vintages over that 2-decade period, 2 of them, you might hit the 5 or 10x and it'll cover the cost of the rest. And I think that's a game these folks are playing. And because of that, I think what they'll do is some of them will orient towards being in funds that are of a certain size and smaller because they want to drive the multiple. Some of them will say, hey, I'm going to stay with my incumbents, my big multi-billion-dollar global platforms, because, hey, if I ever leave, I'm not going to be invited back,
Yeah.
And they're going to be there and we'll kind of ride it out. So I don't know how much it changes per se. I do think this AI wave will put new people on the map too. Like in the last time we mentioned what Dan and Nat are doing of like just separating themselves from everybody else. Like it's so clear, right? If I think about another fund, that should get credit is Menlo. I think they've been very creative and aggressive for a fund their size in the space. It's a bet they're making, right? I admire that. I admire when people make bets.
Yeah.
Clear bets,
You're sort of hanging in there for the year when you might get an outsized return. And that the cost is that most years you won't get that. And that's okay, because that's the price of admission.
But think about OpenAI. If you're the university of, you're Harvard University and you have this huge endowment, if one of your underlying managers at exit can own 5% of OpenAI, and you look at the cost basis of what you had to pay to get in, you'd want that option versus having Citadel be trading in and out of it.
Right. Right.
So you're betting on, I always call it fly paper. Like you're buying into a fund, that fund creates fly paper, and you're hoping that the fly paper that you're invested in is going to catch a few things per decade.
You mentioned Menlo. They're doing things differently. They're placing bets. You mentioned Nat Friedman and Daniel Gross. They're obviously doing really interesting, creative things. Mm-hmm. What about, are you guys doing anything differently at Haystack? Or are you you're doing the same thing you've been doing, which clearly has worked?
No, it's just the philosophy is like people build the companies and technologies and just find interesting people and they'll take us to the place we need to go.
Yeah.
But I've never tried to figure out like where the market's going to go. I have no idea.
Yeah. So same strategy and approach to fund size, check size, entry point, generalized, not super sector specific. That's kind of been your bread and butter each and every fund.
Yeah. I mean, what ends up happening is if you follow or orient around interesting people, invariably those people will be touching this stuff. And so, some of them do raise huge rounds. Like shall go unnamed, but a kid I funded out of college right when I started investing started this huge AI company and raised, big 8 figures out of the gate. Now, we decided not to do that because the entry price was really high and, but we wrestled with it,
Yeah.
And it was great person, like super brilliant person. Maybe we should have, maybe we shouldn't have. I don't know.
And how do you think, okay, now maybe like stepping away from Haystack specifically, how do you think VCs, we talked about how like LPs think about investing in VC and specifically in terms of AI right now, like how do you think GPs and the funds and the different flavors of them, right? Seed, large platforms, the stuff in between, like how are they thinking about their business models in this moment of AI?
Well, I do think there's FOMO cross stage because a lot of VCs are marketing to the ecosystem and founders and their own LPs that this is something they're really excited about and orienting around. But once you start doing that, in a couple of years, you'll have to point to, well, what did that yield? And for the earlier funds, that means that you have to point to like, what are the companies you're in? So like an example I use here to describe this conundrum is like, if you think back to previous trends that got super white hot, you could say crypto, fill in the blank. Once you go deeper into a sector and start to evangelize the benefits or the conviction or your interest around it, that'll influence the flow of what comes in and what you put in the portfolio and increase the scrutiny and megawatts of the spotlight when people say, well, what's in there?
What do you mean?
Let's say you're a big believer in climate technology. It could be everything from mitigation to core technologies. And you built a couple of funds around it, but nothing's really broken out, but it takes longer to break out. People may say like, well, what is breaking out? What is working from there? So you always run a risk when you go kind of vertical or sector specific as a VC, and especially make that intentionally so public that people will start to ask, well, okay, what's your fly paper? What'd you catch with the fly paper?
Yeah.
So that's one way that can manifest. Another way is that like, we don't know if it can go out of favor. Like everyone believes this is going to be that way. But like, what if there's a AI winter? Like no one has talked about an AI winter.
Yeah. Are there still major funds that are not placing bets right now? I feel like I remember like 6-8 months ago, it was like, oh, X firm, is not betting here. they don't think that AI is an opportunity.
Well, I don't want to speak. I don't want to speak for another fund, but my observation from the outside and listening to Founders Fund is that they initially looked at the whole landscape and said, I'm just going to invest in OpenAI and call it a day. I don't want to deal with all the head trauma of trying to figure this out. And one of their interns from 10 years ago helped start Cognition. So they did the seed round of that.
Yep.
And now they're probably like, well, I'll just wait around for something to knock my socks off. And until then, I'm good.
Yeah. Don't chase. Just sort of wait to see if anything like super obvious comes our way. If not, we already have our bets placed.
And the 29 entry, what they put in 300?
That was OpenAI. They put in 300 at 29 billion.
Mm-hmm.
Got it.
Something like that.
Yeah. What did Khosla, what was Khosla's entry point?
I think it was 500 or so.
Wow.
But remember, like, I always tell this story about Vinod because he really is like in a totally different class of gunslinger. Like,
yeah,
when Jack Dorsey was starting Square, I remember, because this is right around when I was like getting into the ecosystem and people were being like, oh, this guy Jack Dorsey is at Twitter, he's going to start this new thing, and the little reader and all that stuff. And he wanted 10 million out of the gate. People were like, that's a Series A out of the gate.
Jack wanted 10 million.
Jack wanted 10 million.
Yep.
So, what did Gideon and Vinod do? It was like, here's 10 on 40. Crushed it. But that broke a lot of conventional wisdom of like how VCs like to tranche their bets. With OpenAI, I don't know who would have done that deal at 500 post, right? Because everyone knows Sam, and like Sam's super connected. He's always going to optimize for exactly what he wants, and he usually gets what he wants, And people are probably like, 500, what?
Yeah. But so, okay, this notion of, sort of like backing great founders, pre-product, pre-company, whatever, like that seems like a pretty common thing in VC today. You're telling me at the time of Square, that was not a common thing to write. I mean, Jack Dorsey we're talking about the Twitter founder here.
Again, at that time, there were a lot of people who were like, I'll fund Jack. I don't want to give him 10 million bucks to start to do this little hardware reader on the phone.
Right. You're saying it was hardware. It was like a very, very out there concept. Yeah. I mean, like before Square existed, it did seem, I remember when they announced it, it was like, wait, how the heck can that thing process a credit card? That doesn't make any sense. Plugs into the audio jack. What? It was super sci-fi actually. Now that we talk about it,
I don't know. I wasn't around that round, but they took the pitch, and I think that we're probably like, hey, this is important. Let's invest in this guy and see what happens.
Yeah. And it seems like he's still doing that, right? I mean, a lot of, you hear a lot about Vinod taking these pre-product bets, or maybe just very, very early bets, showing up at every YC demo day, et cetera.
The thing that's really interesting about him, and I feel like there are a few people in the ecosystem like this, which is one, if you get a meeting with him, it's enough of a series of checkpoints where it's probably interesting, right? Then if he's in the meeting because he's wired the way he is, right? He's got 30 years of VC experience on top of the success as an entrepreneur and his just energy force field around him, right? He can very quickly size up, like, can this person hang in the room with me? And that, I think, is just very hard to replicate, and just the ability to ask questions on the fly and not care what the other party thinks about your questions.
Yeah. When I was building Anchor, we had the good fortune of pitching to him. And yeah, I mean, highly, highly engaged in the meeting. I don't know if he had prepped or not, but he seemed like he had thought a lot about, or he, even in the moment, was thinking a lot about our business and where it could go, asking really, really thoughtful questions. Definitely impressive, for sure. Left an impression on me, for sure.
It's the same thing with people like Mark, where when they've done it and they're operating at a level of intensity and rigor, they can just tell, am I in the ring with the right person? Right? Oh, wait a minute. I'm in a different class. Like, call me later.
Yeah. Haystack has sort of been doing what you all always do. I want to talk about this thing you've been saying to me recently, which I like. And I'm curious to know where you're actually applying it to your life. Clearly not Haystack. And that is Opposite George. Obviously Opposite George, classic Seinfeld episode. George is doing everything that he normally wouldn't do.
I do a lot of this, and I try to do a lot of this in work and life as much as I can.
Tell me about it.
On the personal side, like going on this retreat.
Yeah, you said it was the first time you'd done it, right?
Yeah, and a lot of the retreat work at the end is like the integration of it, right? So it's like the kind of idea is like when you go into these different meditative or conscious states. I mean, I don't mean to sound like pie in the sky, but the hope is that, like, as your brain is quieted down and you think about things and you work in this group conversation about things you want to talk about, you have to integrate it, because for a period of time, your brain is like open to being rewired in certain ways, right? So in work, I would say, there's been a lot of Opposite George, which is like I'll give you an example. Like Haystack for years has funded a lot of dual use DoD type technologies.
Explain what you mean by that.
Like one of the interesting technology companies we invested in, and it's going through a little bit of a rough patch now, but I think should be okay, was a team out of the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio that had become specialists in using electromagnetic signals to take over unmanned aerial aircraft and then take it over. So they were trying to commercialize that solution. And we've done a ton of these things. But, if you notice now, because of the success of Anduril and other companies, and I think it's a real market, it's become more fashionable and in vogue to talk about the defense market as a market for VCs to invest in, right? Like 10 years ago, a lot of people would have said, we're not going to touch it. Right. That's not the case today.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, it's one of the hottest areas right now.
Yeah. So the Opposite George for us is I have this draft blog post that kind of walks through how we have done it over the years and how we got there. Again, much more of a follow the founder approach, right? Like, oh yeah, I met this person. Like I remember meeting Grant, this the drone takeover guy, in a coffee shop in Palo Alto, and just like hearing his whole story. And I was like, I said yes at the end of the meeting, right? Now, I don't know if it'll end up being a good investment or not, but super fascinating company. And I had this whole post written, and I think the regular George mode would have been like, well, hey, everyone's piling into this now. It's a thing. It's a thing. Put Haystack out there. Get Haystack in that zone. And actually, I just decided, like, no, we don't need to do that right now. So that's an Opposite George kind of view.
Are you guys doing a lot of AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the founders we back are technical and curious enough that they're going to include it in what they're doing. And some of them are explicitly focusing on it. So it's either one or the other.
Yeah.
One, I would say they're going to use AI to augment some of what they do, but it's not core to what they do. And another recent one, like the two next ones that we're wiring, one of them is a straight up legal, vertical application in a medical law area for AI.
Yeah, I think I'm doing this a bit as well, maybe because I've been hanging out with you so much, but I'm trying to recently just like fight against some of my instincts. I think for a while, even just like getting settled in VC, I was trying to get really specific around my schedule and building my days in such a way that I allocated a certain percentage to this and then to that. And just so I could feel like I was being more productive. And recently, like, I decided I'm just like throwing all of that out the window.
Well, it's natural for someone like you, because you're 2 years in, right?
Yeah.
And your ramp has been amazing. I mean, most people 2 years in are flailing. you figured a lot of things out a lot quicker. So that's a testament to, like, if you're doing opposite mic or even sprinkling in opposite mic, it's good, right? You should keep doing that. For me, I think it's more just a reminder that, like, I do have to constantly make adjustments and make these decisions, and that we make a lot of mistakes and can get trapped in a lot of things, right? And so I have a whole opposite philosophy, honestly. Like, I don't take it to its extreme, but a lot of times I'll just kind of be like, I'll kind of say, hey, a bunch of people are doing this. And actually, I like those people and I admire those people and they're really smart. But do I want to do that?
Yeah, resisting the impulse to follow the herd.
I think it's just like, stop for a minute and say, do I want to do that? Like, I was invited to this like very exclusive tech event. I've been invited every year. I profusely apologized that I didn't want to go. It was going to be a who's who of people there. So for me, just to be seen there would have been great. Right. Job accomplished. And I woke up that day and I was like, I don't want to go. I feel like I'm behind on deal flow. I'm behind on these emails I got to write. And like the day before, I was totally going to go. And then I emailed my friend who puts it on and I just said, I feel really backed up. I don't think I'll be able to like really enjoy the event. I want to give my seat to somebody else. Like, I'm sorry. And, his assistant was like, thank you. And then a bunch of people text me and they're like, why aren't you here? And I'm like, I don't need to see these people speak. And I was just too distracted by other stuff. And then I had a couple of text threads with people and they were like, yeah, you didn't miss much. And I'm like, So I try to do that when I can, or even around like deals. Like we lost something recently where the round escalated and like the founder, we met the founder early, but he went and talked to like 30 to 50 people. And I get it. Like, it's an overwhelming process, but I try to channel just like, hey, it's okay. Like, he chose a different direction, chose to raise a bigger round, kind of broke our model, and like, you just kind of move on.
Yeah, I've had a couple of deals over the past year where like I get really close to doing it, and then fortunately for whatever reason, maybe you advised me or somebody, hey, stop for a minute, like really think about, don't pull yourself away from the momentum, from the sort of like riptide that's pulling you out to sea, and just like stop for a second. And on a number of occasions, I've gotten really close and then bailed after taking that moment.
Yeah. Well, no shocker here. Like, one of the best articulations I've heard from this, and it's always stuck with me, is from Belsky.
Scott Belsky. Yep.
Yeah. When Scott was thinking about joining Benchmark, obviously I was talking to him a lot about that, and we talk quite a bit. I mean, he's like, okay, I'm going to go do it. Okay, great. Then he's in there, and so I'm kind of asking him, like, hey, how does it work? Like, because they're kind of famed for being fantastic pickers, right? And one of the things he said always stuck with me is, like, you try to get in a constant conversational flow with a set of people that you admire. It's great. Like, we're just kind of helping each other out. But I think creating the time for the subconscious to kick in and guide you a little bit is really important. And if your calendar is full, or you're going to all these events, or you're trying to do the hustle stuff to the next meeting, your subconscious will just never be able to have a say.
Yeah. And it's all external signals. It's like all momentum, all external signals. And then, by the way, you've just signed up for a 10-year commitment.
Yeah.
What's kind of cool is there have been, well, there's one time in particular, but a couple other times where I do that, I back away, and then it comes back up, and the subconscious actually says, no, you made a mistake. And that's even more powerful, I think. And actually, in the case that I'm thinking of, I won't name the company, that was a signal to me that like I actually really needed to go and work with this company, and did end up investing in this company, and now like I'm so glad. So almost like giving yourself permission to have like extended space and see if your subconscious pulls you back in can be the most powerful thing I've found.
Yeah. Like one opposite George feeling I have is like investors shouldn't be in meetings all day.
Yeah.
VC, sorry.
Yeah.
Like if I were running a big firm, I would want my top people like only, I wouldn't want them in meetings all day.
Yeah. No time to think.
Yeah. I want them meeting high impact people and then go on a boat ride, like go on a long walk, go play 9 holes of golf, whatever it is.
Yeah. Past 3 months since we last did this, slightly shifting away from tech. What content have you been into? You and I have obviously talked a lot about Larry David, Curb Your Enthusiasm, I think ended during that time. But what else are you listening to, watching?
No, well, first I need to thank you for the Neal Brennan, Jerry Seinfeld tip like that. I listened to that 3 or 4 times.
It's great. I could listen to those guys talk for 10 hours.
But Jerry's done a bunch of stuff recently, but that was 10x better than all the other stuff.
It was really good.
It was fantastic. So got into that. I mean, I listened to a bunch of Rick Rubin interviews. You know, those were fascinating. His stuff is great. I listened to a lot of like Lex Friedman. I know he's like a fun punching bag for some people. I think he's great.
He's good. The questions are really thoughtful.
Yeah. And then weird content stuff is like I listen to a lot of like astrophysics stuff. It was random. Yeah, just like
really. I didn't know that about you. Really?
Yeah, it's just entertainment, you know.
Tell me more. What about astrophysics?
You know, what actually happened in the Big Bang? Or why did Carl Perlmutter win a Nobel Prize in 2011 for proving that the universe is expanding at a faster rate? Or what happened before the Big Bang? Or like how did Einstein improve on Newton's theories or equations? Like all that.
Where is this,
stuff.
By the way? This is YouTube? What is this?
Yeah, YouTube. Well, I know a lot of the people who like talk about this stuff often, who are like trained astrophysicists. But it's more like entertainment, like in the same way I was very curious. Like I love sports. So I don't really care if Dan Hurley became the Lakers head coach, but I wanted to understand how the Lakers could have screwed up that.
Yeah, you're into the storylines.
Yeah.
I feel like you've said that before. Like you're not a fan of any NFL team, but you love the storylines. Is that right?
Oh, I absolutely do. Yeah, the storylines, the NFL's content generation machine, but yeah, like the Dan Hurley thing, like
fascinating.
I knew as soon as that story dropped, he wasn't going to take it. And I'm like, I just want to see how the Lakers are going to screw this up. And it will be amazing to watch this train wreck happen. And of course it happened. So I'll like, that's more just like mindless stuff. But some of this is like brain clearing stuff versus like, you know, the Neal Brennan, Jerry Seinfeld thing I'm really listening to, right? Like I'm really listening to that. The other thing I've decided to do that I started doing is like I watched Chef's Table before the pandemic, and then I started rewatching it again because so much of my cooking went to another level in the pandemic. So I'm actually gonna I've been taking like notes on like what are the 3 or 5 most interesting things I'm getting from each episode, because I think a lot of it can map back to entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't know if you've ever watched that series.
I haven't. I'm aware of it, but I paused because your point about entrepreneurship has me thinking a little bit. Like, okay, let me make a connection here. You actually said something to me a while ago. You said you were at a dinner. I won't name the person. Obviously, you can name the person if you want, but I won't name the person. And you said that they said something like the reason they love tech or they love working in tech or VC or something is because it's the greatest show on earth.
Oh, yeah, sure.
You remember telling me this, I'm sure. Do you think the entertainment value of tech drives the results of tech in some way? Tech is highly entertaining, right? We spent a half hour talking about WWDC. Yeah. There's a new OpenAI story every other day. Elon Musk, amazing rocket launch the other day.
We didn't even talk about all the criminal activity in tech, but
yeah, we didn't talk about any of that stuff. This stuff is entertaining. And by the way, every time there is one of these things, it takes over Twitter. That probably creates some sort of feedback loop for the founders or the people involved. Do you think that the entertainment value that founders, companies, creators deliver, maybe not super consciously, maybe subconsciously, is part of what drives them and therefore drives results?
Drives them, yes. That's an easy yes. Does it drive the results? I don't know. I'm a little bit stumped by that question, to be frank. I don't have a clear gut reaction answer to that. This word disruptive is used in startups and tech, and people kind of hate that word. But let's put the connotation aside. In the last, 2 decades or so, what were the truly disruptive companies, meaning like they moved other people's cheese, right? So for sure, Facebook was disruptive.
Yep.
I think for sure, in a very different way, Uber was disruptive.
It was literally the one I was going to say next to.
And then we definitely have OpenAI.
How are you defining disruptive here?
Meaning like you agitate different parts of the economy.
Okay. Yeah.
You put people on notice and they get angry.
And we're talking about decades, like past 10 years?
I'm just saying the past, since Zuck in the dorm room in 2004. So it is the greatest show on earth. It's produced these truly disruptive companies, a bunch of companies below that have driven this thing. And I think it's a disruptive force in technology. I mean, look at some of the senators out there who are saying crazy things about it. I mean, this is now getting more political, but I just think it's crazy that like in our country, we have so many elected officials who are like trying to like openly mock and cut down our best assets. Like it doesn't make any sense to me, And it's not to say they shouldn't be regulated or watched in some degree, but like, I don't know. It's just, I've never been able to figure that out.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think OpenAI is in that category for sure.
Oh, 100%.
For sure. I'm thinking about all this. Actually, your mention of OpenAI is what brought me back. I kind of feel like it probably, the entertainment value of tech probably does drive results to some extent. Bringing it all the way back to WWDC, think about how much of these products or these launches happen in these demos, in these events. And think about what goes into planning these. Oh, this will look great on stage. This will look great when we reveal it like this. They're basically orchestrating the entertainment of these products.
Now, the person who said this is the greatest show on earth, he was more talking about startups.
Okay.
Like if a startup is a spectacular success, it's a great show. If a startup has a spectacular fall, it's a great show. Everything in its extremity, in its extreme form, is a great show.
Yeah. The arc of the journey.
It's entertainment, yeah.
It's like why certain companies had, Netflix series.
It sounds cliche, but that's why I go around and people are like, oh, have you seen VC? And I'm like, do you realize you have the greatest job in the world? Like, okay, what would you do up? Like, what else would you do? Putting aside the fact that most VCs couldn't hold a real job in and of itself once they become a VC, but like, you are meeting the most amazing people every day. Like, that's a show.
This is a good place to leave it.
There we go.
This is fun. Maybe we'll do it again in 3 months.
Depending on if the ratings tank now. Although don't listen to the Rick Rubin would say don't create for others.
Create for yourself, right? Is that what he says?
Something like that.
Semil, thank you so much. This was a blast.
Sir, have a great trip.
Thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Semil. If you liked what you heard, please do us a favor and rate and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. That really helps. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you tap the subscribe button so you get notifications every time we publish a new episode. Generative Now is produced by Lightspeed in partnership with Pod People. We will be back next week with another awesome episode. Thanks so much.